All right. Well, speaking of phenomenal, I think it's time to turn toward bringing on our next featured speaker, who I know has a phenomenal program lined up. So this is Tom Bates, and he's someone who's been involved in a lot of different aspects of both arts and the sciences, starting out with architecture and physics, and then while he was a physics graduate student, he got sort of roped in by a software company to sort of do some programming for them. So, that kind of shifted his direction, and he did that for a while. But he also had always felt drawn to the arts, and somehow neither physics nor the computer science and doing the programming had really scratched that itch of his. So he began to shift away from that professional programming to programming that served his own artistic needs. He started to go into digital or generative art, two-dimensional art that was based on software programs that use math and other principles to create beautiful images. And so that really allowed him to expand the portion of his interest palette that he was able to explore. And then that he's turned that also into his vocation. He's sold artworks and prints, through his own website that you can check out. And then lately, he's expanded even more. He's been getting into 3D artwork and creating furniture making. So let's bring on Tom and say hello. So,
am I there?
Yes, you are. You're right here with us.
Okay, I was having a lot of trouble. When I went to share the screen, it was all great. It wouldn't let me hit the share button. So anyway, I'm glad it's working.
Okay, good. So great to have you here with us. And that's quite a list of different interesting activities that you have under your belt. It brings to mind a word, but I don't want to insult you. One might think of that as sounding a little bit like a dilettante.
You must have, maybe you read my bio that I sent to Lisa. I don't know, but I'm in a process of recovering that word in its original meaning.
Oh yeah.
It's from Old Italian, and it means love of joy and knowledge in the arts. And I am a dilettante only in the sense that I have a vast number of interests, and I chafe at going into specialization. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my thing.
Yeah, it's true that our society often wants to slot people into this is what they are and who they are. Yeah. So it's great to see someone like you that strives to defy those expectations. I have a lot of respect for that.
It's why I call my website Between Art and Science, because that's where I've always felt I was at some points in my life. I felt stuck there. Now I feel liberated there. So
excellent. All right, and speaking of great presentations, today, if I understand, you have a presentation called Sequences on Parade, and if I understand the structure of it, it's going to be divided up into 3 portions, and we'll get a chance to break for a little discussion, maybe some questions from the audience after each one of the sections. Does that sound good?
I think, yeah, that's what I've been told, and they're a little disparate from each other, but I think what they have to do with sequences will all become clear pretty quickly. And okay. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, let's see. I guess we're still a couple minutes ahead of your official start time.
Right.
So just for the respect of those who might be looking at the calendar and waiting to tune in right at your time, let's just give that another minute. In the meantime, you can tell us, how did you first hear about the Prison Math Project?
Well, that's an interesting story. I had been attending before COVID the Bridges Math Art conferences. And I had gotten back from one, and I got an email from Christopher. I didn't know who he was at the time. And he asked if he could use an image of mine that I had in the gallery at the Bridges conference. And he didn't really say exactly who he was. And I noticed that, like my own email, it wasn't from an educational institution. So I was curious, and I replied asking him to tell me about himself. And I'll admit that, of course, in these days, you Google people. So I had Googled him, And the only thing I found was related to a guy in prison. And it's a thing of mine that recidivism is reduced by education, and that's proven, and it's a big deal with me that we don't do enough of that. And so I waited for his reply. My only other criteria was that it be honest, if that was indeed him, and it was, and he was incredibly honest and forthcoming. So I really admired that. And of course I said, yes, you can use the piece of art. And so that's how my journey with Christopher began.
Excellent. Okay, and now with Sequences on Parade, part 1, which is, let's see, part 1 is patterns for playing around with the integer number line. Here's Tom Bates.
Just a moment. Have that up. There we go. Can you all see that? Is that visible? Can you hear me? Hopefully this is visible.
Tom, you may need to go ahead and try to share one more time. You might have to remove one of those videos you uploaded. Pardon me.
Oh, all right. Sorry about that.
No problem. Just bear with us, ladies and gentlemen.
So I removed one of them. I can remove them all, actually, if you'd like. So my screen is being shared, so I just went and opened the PowerPoint full screen, and you're not seeing that, I take it.
We don't see your screen share, so maybe stop sharing and go back to the screen share button.
This is where it takes me into a dialogue that has, oh, no, share is grayed for me.
Okay, from that window, can you select the picture of what it is you're wanting to share? It's probably a screen. So
I see my klutziness here.
There you go. All right, I think we're in business here. Here we go.
Can you see that?
Yes, we do.
Can you see the PowerPoint? Excellent. So what you see in the background here is an image called Ulam's Spiral. This was made by Stanislaw Ulam back in the 60s, early 60s, I think. He was a famous mathematician. I'm sure the mathematicians here know about him. And he was bored at a mathematical conference, is the story I've read. So, of course, he got a napkin and a pen and spiraled the integer number line around itself in a square and marked the primes, and was somewhat surprised to see what I call a diagonal dust here. Some of the terms I'll be using are just made up by me as I went along in looking into this. And he wrote a few papers on it and then went back to his day job at Los Alamos. But the interesting thing is that he used the Maniac II computer, one of the earliest powerful for the time computers, and he made what are probably some of the very first, if not the first, computer graphic images. And this is an example of that I wrote some code to make. So this intrigued me a lot, and I read his 2 papers, but what really interested me initially was just pure curiosity. I wanted to know what the multiple of every integer looked like on the square spiral. So I wrote a little code and started playing around with that. And now I'm going to actually show a video, hopefully. So this is what I saw initially as I started playing around with that. There's a little bit of intro here. So now we'll just see several integers and what they look like when you spiral up the square number line, the number line on a square tessellation or a hexagonal tessellation. And obviously the first thing is that instead of being incredibly similar on a number line, within a scaling factor, they're all different. Every single integer gives a different pattern, which the artist side of me fell in love with. You can also see in that 6 one on the left, the hexagonal ones do a little bit of a funny thing on multiples of 6. And here on that square one, the multiples of 8 for square tessellation do some sort of bifurcation type of business. So I'm just giving a little bit of the variety here that comes from and was quite exciting to me as an artist from such a simple thing. And then they get curly and all sorts of stuff happens. There's also a repeating pattern in most of them within a chunk on the plane that is, for the square at least, a square of the number. So moving along, that was all very interesting, but really artistically, they're just dots. But you can start doing fun things by dressing these patterns up in various ways, playing with shape, color, transparency, overlapping them at times, all kinds of things. The only problem with that is that I really wanted to make some animations. And obviously, all these patterns are very different from one to the other. So making animations is sort of a non-starter if you stick with the integers. But we only have the integer plane with the curled up number line to play with. So somehow I have to go from things between numbers to get an animation, but they have to end up on the integer plane. So I started thinking about that, and all that's really important here to see is the box on the right. And if you take multiples of 3.2, I should explain for the broader audience that there's two very important functions here in mathematics that I'm using, and they're very simple to explain: the floor function and the ceiling function. The floor function operating on 3.2 would take it to 3, and the ceiling function would take it to 4. That's all these things do. But if you look at trying to take multiples of something like a rational number instead of an integer, you get these interesting patterns. So here we see the spacing that happens is 3, as you might expect, since we're starting with something close to 3. But then every once in a while, a spacing pattern of 4 comes along, as if it was plucked out of the multiples of 4. This pattern so this mixes the spacings of the multiples of floor of your rational number and ceiling of your rational number. What's more, this pattern will repeat at some point. So here, taking the rational number 1.2, and we floor that and get this pattern that mixes up the multiples of 1 and 2. But the really interesting thing to note, I've demarked with red vertical lines what I call the repeat unit of these mixed patterns. And the pattern will show 5 spacings within each of these in this case, and 1/5 of those are 4 spacings, and 2 spacings, sorry, and the 4 remaining ones are 1. And that means that you see the exact value of the fractional part of the rational number in the spacing pattern itself. 20% of the spacings here are from the multiples of 2. You can also figure out just how many spacings you need to get one of those repeat patterns. Since it's Pi Day, I thought I should look at what the spacing requirement is for 3.1415. Fractional part is all that matters to figure this out. 1,415 10,000ths can be reduced to 283 2,000ths. And what this means is that the repeat unit for 3.415, when it's spiraled up, will be 283 4 spacings distributed among 17, 17, 3 spacings, and then that pattern will repeat. So suddenly I had a way to make animations, because now I can make very gradual changes from one frame to another. This is part of my not being a mathematician or just rediscovering things to some extent. I came across recently that there's a whole field called stochastic computing that uses a similar kind of approach to represent rational numbers. So that was fun. The other thing is, the more precision you want, the longer the repeat unit becomes. Again, it being Pi Day, I made a brief animation here of going from 3 to 3.1415. This is a little jerky. It turns out these animations become more flowy when you start with larger numbers to begin with, but this is still fun enough. So now I'm going to play a much longer video. It's about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, that gets into a little less jerky, a little more flowy by using larger numbers. There's a bit of a reprise here of what's going on. And then we get into the visual fun. Again, you can see that kind of jerkiness that happens at the lower integers, at least on the scale you can do for a video at HD resolution. This was a gigantic screen of some kind. We could do a lot better. But letting the credits roll just so my musician, who was a high schooler at the time, gets some credit here. And let's see, where am I here? 35. I'm getting kind of close. Close that. These are just images, stills, obviously, of various numbers spiraled up. You've seen some of them in the videos. This I made just for today. I love this image. When I first saw it, I really did think of dancing, and so I named it Let's Dance in honor of David Bowie and his song, his fantastic song, and the album it's on. These are more art images made for a Bridges conference. These are tessellations of numbers between 1 and 3. Similarly here, a variety of numbers. You can also layer these on top of each other. So here's some small rational variations away from 8 that have been layered on top of one another. This is doing this, but doing some scaling operations on the result of 9.9, 9.5 rather, on the hexagonal spiral. This is again pi. This is taken into a very abstract range. And this is the number 55 taken into a very abstract range. And that is the end of this first part of my talk. Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying today. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Excellent. And yeah, now we wanted to just get a chance for a little discussion about the first part of your presentation. And of course, we can also bring Alex on as well, in case he has some questions, things he wants to chime in with. But in any case, one of our viewers, as they were watching, was prompted to remark that this began to look kind of like the Mandelbrot set. Is there like a connection there, or is there some relation to what you're doing, or is it like a coincidence of mathematics?
I think it's a coincidence, but I'm not the person to answer that question. I've thought the same thing. You see there's an infinite variety in these patterns, obviously, because there's an infinite number of rational numbers and integers. So it's amazing to me what just pops up. This is the joy I get from just playing around with these ideas. And I've written my own software to let me create these things. So I don't know if there's a connection to the Mandelbrot set, and it'd be very interesting to me if someone had some idea about that.
And before we get on to the next question, I just want to give a quick shout out to the students and faculty of Winona State University who have tuned in to be part of our Pi Day celebration today. Great to have you with us, and thanks for joining in. Hope you'll get to watch more. Alex, I don't know if you had a question or one of the questions from the audience.
The only question I see is the one about the Mandelbrot, but no, the from Winona, they really love to talk. And I really love the reference to, as a Bowie fan, I really love the reference to That Stance and how that inspired you to name that image.
Yeah, it's a great song. I couldn't resist.
So who composed the music? You said that a high school student was playing the music on your videos. Who composed that music?
I'm spacing on his name at the moment, but it was at the end of the credits there. He was a friend. He was the grandson of a friend, and I showed him this video, and I said, "Now I need music." And he said, "Oh, you should contact my grandson." So I did, and he was into it. So it was really fun to go back and forth, showing him versions of the video and getting music back, and sort of collaborating on that.
All right, I think it's time to dive into the next section of your presentation, which is crazy curves from the Chaos Game. Take it away, Tom.
Yes. This is also fun to be doing this today, although a little intimidating as well, with the inventor of the Chaos Game here today, presenting later. And again, I came across what I'm going to be talking about here a long time ago, actually, before the internet really did much for you, Googling, and I couldn't find much about the questions I had about the Chaos Game. So I decided to just dive in and go in my own direction. So again, there will be possibly some made-up terminology. Well, there is some made-up terminology, but I'll explain that once we get there. So I came across the Chaos Game years ago in a tiny, it wasn't even an article, it was a little 2x3-inch snippet in Wired magazine, I think. And it talked about making the Sierpinski gasket, not in the usual sort of take a piece of paper and start cutting out triangles, but instead this odd algorithm where you take a point to begin with anywhere, doesn't even have to be in the triangle, and you start targeting the vertices of the triangle. And what you do is you jump halfway. So you go from your starting point to halfway towards some vertex you picked, and then you keep repeating this. From that point that you've just put down, you pick another vertex, and the important thing here is that these vertices are picked at random, and you just keep doing this. And eventually, the Sierpinski gasket emerges from this. This really intrigued me, and it's a lovely algorithm, very simple, and yet, as I went further and further, very, very rich in terms of the artistic possibilities. So what I'm talking about, for those who don't know about this is what the algorithm does. We'll fade into the final result because we don't have time to watch this thing put down 100,000 points, but that's the idea. So my first question when I came across all this was, but how do I generalize that to any regular polygon? And at the time I couldn't find anything. And probably there was a part of me that didn't really want to find anything because, taking the hike myself rather than hearing about it was more interesting to me. So I started looking at how this could be generalized to other polygons. But first, I also wanted to understand what was really going on with this algorithm. So there's two cases, two runs, very short runs of the chaos game going on here. One starts in the very middle of the triangle and starts heading towards random vertices, first to the lower right, and goes halfway, and then et cetera, et cetera. And you notice the points that are appearing are in what is eventually white space. And I came across somebody talking about how, yeah, if you start in the middle, you get a little few points that are meaningless, but then you get the gasket. Well, really, they're not meaningless at all. You eventually very quickly reach a resolution point of any possible device. And these points will, in fact, end up looking like the Sierpinski gasket, even if you start in white space. You could also start up at the top and the same kind of thing happens. Notice that the pathway that's being followed here always takes the starting point to a geometrically equivalent place at smaller and smaller children triangles as the very first point's relationship to the parent triangle. So we've got this point here, and we go down a little to the right and down, and we're at the top of another triangle, and we've jumped halfway. And this continues. This kind of geometrical congruency of where all these points are placed when you use the value of 1/2 for the triangle is, to me, the essence of what's going on here. So that gave me a clue about how to generalize things. And what I realized was, if this would actually play the video that's here, that's not what I thought it was. I guess that was supposed to be a video showing children growing from the points of these vertices until they just touch or kiss. I call those the first level children. And those first level kissing children were for me the key to generalizing this. You don't really need to pay attention to any of this, but this was sort of how I worked out for a general case what exactly this number should be for any other regular polygon. And it all comes down to the distance from the center of the parent polygon to one of the vertices, and the ratio of the distance from that center to the center of the first level child. In other words, the CA over CO or C0 here. That ratio will give you the number you need to generalize to any regular polygon. This is just more of that congruency. We follow a path that starts in the middle of the pentagon. We end up in the first child level pentagon over on the right. And then on the next step, we end up in the same relative place on the next level down of child pentagons. But at this point, I was thinking now more in terms of art. And I wanted, one more thing. I also realized that if you just were to take that cut number, I call it the cut fraction, and ramp it instead of picking that one special number. If you ramped it, say, from 0 to 2, you discover there's another fractal on the outside mostly of the parent pentagon that comes in at a number that the formula also gives you. But still, to me, this is fascinating mathematically, but artistically, it's very knowable. And for me, art needs to have some kind of what is going on there factor to keep your brain engaged. So I started looking at the paths themselves between placed points as part of the art, and doing various things with the points themselves. So here are many of the paths that were taken during the algorithm running. So this is from ramping the cut fraction. and from 0 to 2 in this case, well, from 0 to 1.33 in this case. But then I also started looking at the points that are created for any given cut fraction, say 0.1 or 0.5, whatever. And soon enough, you realize that they're making curves. I'm going to skip around here a little. So these are a few different runs of very short runs again of the chaos game at different cut fractions in the triangle. The very first one starts at 0.25. So there's 2 on either side of the magical value for the triangle, the kissing number, I called it. And what you see is that as you do this, the very first point placed generates a line, in this case. The second point placed generates a curve that's coupled. It's sort of being pulled to that straight line, even though it wants to go to vertex 2, and eventually it does make it. Then the third point makes its own curve, again being influenced by the previous curve, but eventually gets to its target point, etc., etc. So then I finally started making something that was somewhat artistic. There's a good story here. This is in fact the image that Christopher first contacted me about wanting to use in an article. And in this case, it's a mashup of the outer pentagonal fractal and a hexagonal fractal that's off of the magic numbers, so that there's a lot of points colliding over each other. But in addition, the points that are placed are colored according to the vertex they were heading towards. So this gives a kind of a gradation, giving this almost stained glass look to my eye. And then up in the upper right corner is a 7-gon case in which only those paths between point placings are shown with very low very high transparency, very low alpha for all of the lines, but they build up beautifully at the vertices of the parent polygon and make sort of a starburst outside of that. That's that process going on right there. Here's the paths in yellow, but when you do a whole bunch of them, I have no idea how many it was here, but many thousands, you get something more artistic to my eye. So this is a short little video showing ramping, which gives a fun little effect, especially at the beginning, but also sort of gives you a better idea of the possibilities of what can happen when you're ramping. And then ending with the outer fractal, but not going any further yet. Another video. These are just the curves. And because we're going to go past the outer kissing number, the curves start to get crazy because they're getting exponentially pushed away from the previous point placed. This was in a Bridges Conference art show from 2019, I think. Another thing you can do once you are playing around like this is, instead of picking random vertices, what happens, what kind of curves and other things can you get when you actually control the vertices as they're chosen? You're not going to, of course, get the fractal now, but you can get other things. by using the curves that I've been talking about and the lines that connect each point as you run each instance of the chaos game. So many instances of the chaos game were run here. Each set of lines refers to one of those. And this, of course, is the image at the beginning, but now I've shown some of the paths escaping out into who knows where as it was run further. I have a video here. So now the curves just went through points that are actually on the gasket. So these kinds of images, especially in the animations, just kind of blow my mind that they come from such a simple algorithm being used perhaps a little off-road at times. And I think that's one of the joys of letting yourself play around, as mathematicians do and artists do, to just see what happens if you try various things. And you never really know what might happen. It might be not worthy of anything, or it might be a whole lot of fun. Finally, I have a 3D animation. There's no reason you can't, well, I'll let it speak for itself. And that is, except for some other images I could show, but I actually want to get, I see I'm getting close to my time. I want to get to my third part, I think, which is a lot of pie images. Would you like me to pause before I do that, or?
I mean, that's really up to you. We could take them. We could just leave questions then for the end, or we could take a couple now, whichever you prefer.
Why don't I get through the pictures of the third part? It's just a slideshow of images that are all related to pi being put through some fun algorithmic transformations. So I thought, given what just happened to our clocks, this would be a good one to start with. The digits of pi are the input to what's going on here. I think this one had about, I don't know, 25,000 digits of pi. And what I'm doing here is running kind of a crazy made up algorithm, which takes the digits, creates rectangles that grow a bit with time, but are always somehow tied to the particular digit. And these are being wrapped up according to some symmetry feature. So in this case, the symmetry feature, I think, was about 500. So the result looks very circular. And then, of course, all kinds of stuff is going on with coloring algorithms as this figure was produced to hopefully produce a range of colors that went well with one another. On the other extreme, this is a case where the symmetry was set to 2. So it made a line, a linear image from the digits of pi as it worked away. And this is, these names were all made up recently by me just to have fun with it. This is done with symmetry at 4. This is that image, but modified in terms of colors and transparency to something much more relaxing and peaceful. This is an image I made some time ago, which I do call Pi Gets Around for Real. And this is 10,000 digits of pi, and again, that same kind of algorithm running, but in black and white. I always struggle between, I love black and white images and I love colored images. So I'm always going back and forth. This to me just felt very meditative. This, not so much. This is another one similar to the circular ones. Kind of a cross between meditative and not so much. These are colorings as the algorithm runs in various ways. And then recently, my wife and I have been on a long, crazy journey that's taken most of my attention for the last 6 months, finding a new house. And I didn't think I was going to be able to come up with anything new. But one day I thought about weaving algorithmically various sequences and started writing some code to do that. So I call this one Euler's tapestry because it's inspired by Euler's identity. This is a weaving of the digits of E and pi. Pi are the strips that go vertically, and the widths of those strips are determined by the digits of pi. And similarly for E, going horizontally and being woven in and under the pi digit strips. This is just a different coloring algorithm. This is pi on pi. Both vertical and horizontal come from the digits of pi. This is pi by pi. Again, the pi is vertical, phi is horizontal. And then I started doing some weavings, but haven't gotten very far with those, of doing them in a circular way. This is, I don't even remember. I think this is pi on pi, but it might be pi on E. So that is my presentation.
Terrific. And let's also bring Alex back in.
A wonderful talk. Really loved it.
Thank you. It's been fun to do. It's these kinds of things where math and art get mixed up are just wonderful. I love what Jeffrey was saying about the Thule sequence. I was actually at a Bridges conference once, and I was a little nervous before my talk, and the presenter before me was using that sequence to do drumming stuff, and he had us all drumming on our knees and things like that. And it was so relaxing, and it just took all of my nervousness away from the talk.
And it also, and this is and one of the major themes with like the talks, also showcasing this artistic aspect of doing mathematics.
Yes.
That sometimes we fail to see it in our earlier schooling when it's just memorize these formulas, and it's really
Yes.
just a creative endeavor that we get to really go ahead and explore.
Exactly. It's an abstract creativity, and then it can be a very visual creativity. And I think it's actually a shame that this isn't presented at a very early age in kids' educations. One of the reasons I wanted to come up with a purely geometric thing for the generalizing the chaos to any polygon was I wanted it to be something I could present in a STEM situation to high schoolers, and have some of them understand it and get into it, and then show them pictures and what you could do with that, and get them excited from people that might just be into art and think that's all they want to do, but they might find that, oh my goodness, math could be a part of my art.
Yeah, and in fact, on that aspect of taking the math and starting to explore it creatively, we did have a question in the chat. If someone wanted to get started creating art from mathematics using just a few basic colors and paper, so no technology, just things that could be done with very simple equipment, is there anything you could recommend as a good starting point, or a good way to get started with something like that?
I think, well, the sequences idea, I think, is very approachable. And it also is sort of a challenge, because initially you just see a sequence of numbers, say in pi, and what are you going to do with that? But if you start looking at, well, what if I start treating these as distances or colors or something like that to bring in some artistic ideas? And also, if you're looking at a formula that you've had to memorize, what if you just played around with it and did something that was quote unquote wrong and saw what might happen? I actually did that once, came up with an image I really loved. I'd accidentally typed into a transformation, instead of X and Y separately, I just said X and copied it and was X over here. And all of a sudden this bizarre thing appeared. And, so be willing to don't think you're trying to get a right answer. And that's sort of the beauty of allowing yourself to do art, is that there is no right answer. Now, you might want to know something about the right answers behind what you're doing, but let yourself hike off into the wilderness and see what can happen. I think just being free about how you approach it is I think the crucial thing that's not taught to the same degree as the rigor. And I think that if it were, there'd be a lot more people interested in math and continue to be interested in math for the rest of their life.
Then at the opposite end of the spectrum, we had another question, which is if somebody wanted to play around with the kinds of images that you're creating and they do have access to technology, where can they get the code for this sort of thing?
Well, unfortunately, I've written, when I started doing all this a long time ago, I couldn't find any programs that did this. And, for a while I was complaining to myself about, why can't you algorithmically control Photoshop and Illustrator better than they make it very clunky. And having worked in tech, in programming, I decided I should quit bitching about it and I should write my own graphics package. So that's what I did. And that isn't anything I've ever published or put out on open source or anything. But there is actually a great alternative, and that is processing. The processing program, and GeoGebra to some extent as well. And you can mix and match those two programs. And processing will force you to learn some Java. And it's very powerful. You can do things quickly as you get good at it. I was at a Bridges conference once, and I was amazed. I'd given a talk about the sequences being curled up. And at the end of my talk, I went back to my seat, and this guy comes up to me with his laptop, and he says, I loved what you did up there. In fact, I wrote code in processing to reproduce it. And he starts showing me that he's, in the 15 minutes of my talk, he both listened to the talk, but also wrote enough code to do some preliminary things with that. So processing is a wonderful program, I think, for this sort of mix-up of art and computers and math.
That sounds great. In fact, maybe when you get through this, maybe if you put a link in the public chat on the prisonmathproject.org website with a link maybe to your favorite tutorial about processing, so that people who are interested, could get involved. That sounds like a great idea.
The other thing I would suggest is learning to use some programs that are free, like I was using the VLC player for showing videos. And with processing, I haven't done this myself. My program does this because I wrote the code for it to do it, making frames that then all get composited. But, Premiere Elements is free. Adobe Premiere Elements is free. Well, it's not free, but it's a one-time deal. You don't have to pay a monthly charge. So there's a lot of software out there that people could use and teachers could be telling kids about that would be accessible.
In addition, just this conversation also reminds me, there's Jeff Weeks has a website, geometrygames.org, where you can play like tic-tac-toe on a torus, and also there's like hyperbolic geometry that is used. And to also share that in the chat, this is relevant, and also showcases more of this artistic aspect of approaching mathematics, and also putting games that we are used to, but now with this new flavor.
Right. I haven't heard of him. That's great.
A couple questions on your second segment, the one to do with the trajectories of points and so on, and generalizing the chaos game, getting curves. One is, you say generalize it to all polygons. We just saw regular polygons. Does that same approach work for non-regular?
I thought I said regular polygons. I may have dropped the regular a number of times. The chaos game works fine with any triangle. It doesn't have to be regular. But once you get away from regular higher ones into higher order polygons, I'm not aware of it working. I've wondered about this and wanted to play around with that very thing, sort of maybe write some meta code that would make thousands of examples of attempting things. But I think we do, however, upcoming later today, have the guest to ask about all of these questions, including any possible relation to the Mandelbrot set of the integer sequences. He's obviously the go-to guy, and I can't thank him enough for coming up with the chaos game algorithm, because it's certainly given me a lot of joy exploring how far you can go with it.
Excellent. And then the other thing noticed is that as the ramp got to 1, as the fraction of motion got to 1, obviously everything converged at a vertex. I understand why that happens, because you can jump all the way each time. then they diverge on the other side. And
Right.
some of them seem to be going out to infinity, but end up curling around to a different vertex.
They get, I'm not sure I'm using the mathematically correct word, but to me, they get chaotic themselves. When they start going out there, they no longer, because remember, they're all coupled. All those curves are coupled.
Right.
So anything one of them is tending to do is going to have an influence down the road. It's kind of like taking my background is more physics than math. Taking, the three-body problem is still this unsolved deal in physics. And here you've got, n has gone to a very large number with all of these couplings of things in those curves. And it gives sort of a mysterious beauty to it.
So does every trajectory eventually come back to some other vertex once it's gone through, or does some of them really go out to infinity?
I don't know, because I don't have an infinite screen for one thing. And I'm curious about these issues, but I would have to be more willing to give up doing art and doing more of the deep math to know how those behave. I'd be fascinated to know if someone does know. And again, he'll be on the show later.
In the last slides, you were showing like how pi and e and like the interwoven digits and how that creates new art. I was curious, have you done this with other irrational numbers, say like the square root of 2, and how those patterns look like or differ?
No, I just wrote the code to do the weaving literally a month or two ago when we were in this midst of searching for a city and a house and all that. So all these little interstitial attempts to write a little bit of code here and there. And now, though, I want to, there's a wonderful website, I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but it's sequences. And you can download any sequence of all kinds of things, including like the sequence Jeffrey talked about. I really want to use that sequence now. Probably when we're done today, I'm going to go and put that into my program and see what its spiral looks like if you color it in various ways.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and then one last question we had is the patterns you showed in the weaving part at the end. They all had they just felt like a different plaid. Like it could be this is the official tartan of the Mac clan or something like this.
Right.
Is that because of the color choices you made? Is it something inherent, in that weaving process? And so how did you approach choosing the colors to bring out that structure?
It's a good question, and I think the thing I should have included there would have been some images done in black and white. And so, all the digits of pi would have been black and all the digits of E would have been white or something like that. And you could get into that question of how much is the visual coming from the color choices and that kind of thing. My program lets me, ramp up hue, saturation, brightness, all kinds of things for all of those things. And I just sit there and play until it's something I'm happy with, much like a painter painting on canvas, oh, this is just crud. I'm going to put white over it and start over so I don't have to give up the canvas. But it's a little easier and less costly when you're doing it in software. But I spend, for any given image that I like as a piece of art myself, there are a lot of hours of playing around, which fortunately I enjoy almost as much as finally coming to something I say, okay, I'm done.
Wonderful. Okay, I think at this point we can thank our speaker again. That was just a beautiful presentation. Thanks for being part of Pi Day, and we'll look forward to seeing more of what you do in the future.
Thank you. I thank you very much for having me, and I'm really enjoying this. It's sort of like being at a Bridges conference again, which I quit going to under COVID. So,
thank you, Tom.
All right. So, Alex, I think if I understand, you're going to need to be getting going soon. But if you had any other closing thoughts or things you wanted to cover here, happy to hear.
I just actually wanted to bring up a website that Tom had mentioned, and the name had escaped me for a moment. Also, so he mentioned this website that has sequences, and so this is the online encyclopedia for integer sequences. And so I'll put the link in the chat.
Well, unfortunately, links are suppressed in that chat, so better to
okay.
post just a few keywords that somebody could Google for, and
Will do.
and they'll be able to find that more easily.
Yeah, but it's a great website. You can put in various combinations of sequences, and then it'll output all the various sequences that the database has with those starting digits.
Cool. That sounds great. All right. We'll look forward to that, and hopefully maybe we'll get a chance to see you back next year, maybe as a presenter.
Sounds good. No, I've really enjoyed hosting, and thank you so much for the opportunity. And for everyone watching, continue to enjoy the wonderful talks that are lined up, and Pi Day, and hopefully have some Pi in the process.